The scream cut through the house without warning. It was sharp, raw, and filled with something far more dangerous than grief. Chairs scraped violently across the floor. Glass shattered. A heavy thud followed, and then the room locked into a tense stillness. This meeting was never supposed to turn into this. Everyone had gathered around the table, believing the worst was already over. The funeral had passed. The condolences had stopped. What remained was paperwork, signatures, and the quiet division of what was left behind. That belief lasted less than a minute. A folder slammed onto the table hard enough to rattle everything around it. Someone stood up too fast. Another voice rose, thick with disbelief, then hardened into anger. Words that had been buried for years were finally dragged into the open. This makes no sense. No, it makes perfect sense. The response landed with finality. Whatever had just been read had shifted the balance in the room. One person's breathing grew shallow. Another looked away too quickly. A third allowed a faint smile to surface before forcing it back down. Something had gone terribly wrong. The house, once a symbol of pride and success, suddenly felt hostile. Portraits lining the walls looked down like witnesses to a verdict that had been decided long ago. The ticking of an old clock echoed louder than it ever had before. A bitter laugh broke out from the far side of the table. "So this is how it ends," the voice said. "After everything." No one responded. No one knew how. A man seated slightly apart from the others had not spoken since the meeting began. He had not raised his voice. He had not reacted when the argument erupted. He simply watched, his expression unreadable, as the room began to fracture. Then he reached into his briefcase. The sound of paper sliding against leather was subtle, but it shifted every eye in the room toward him. "There is something else," he said quietly. The tension tightened immediately. He placed a sealed envelope at the center of the table. Thick paper. No markings. No explanation. "This was left with very specific instructions," he continued. "It was not intended to be read today." Several people leaned forward at once. "But given what's happening now," he added, "I was warned this situation might arise." No one sat back down. The envelope remained untouched, heavy with implication. "What is it?" someone asked. He looked around the table before answering, his gaze lingering a moment too long on certain faces. "It's a letter," he said, "and once it's opened, whatever is written inside cannot be taken back." A ripple of unease moved through the room. "You should all understand something before I break the seal," he continued. Every sound in the house seemed to fade, except for the quiet thud of hearts beating too fast. "This letter explains why the inheritance was divided the way it was." Shock registered instantly. "But more than that," he said, "it reveals something your family was never meant to uncover." No one reached for the envelope. No one stopped him either. In that moment, before a single word had been read, every person at the table felt the same cold realization settle in their chest. Whatever was written on that page had already destroyed them. They just didn't know how yet. No one spoke after that. The envelope stayed in the center of the table untouched, as if the paper itself carried weight far beyond ink and words. The argument that had erupted minutes earlier did not resume. Something more dangerous than anger had taken its place. Fear. The eldest sibling was the first to break eye contact with the envelope. He leaned back slowly, jaw tight, arms crossed like armor. This was not how he had expected the meeting to go. For years, he had prepared himself for disappointment, even betrayal, but not this kind of uncertainty. He had always believed the family's future rested on logic, seniority, loyalty, sacrifice. He had given up his youth to the business, missed birthdays, skipped holidays, carried responsibility when no one else wanted it. Whatever the document on that table said, it could not erase that history. Or so he told himself. Across from him, the youngest sibling sat unusually still. Confidence had carried her through the first moments after the will was read, but now that confidence felt thinner, stretched tight. She had returned after years away, believing the past was settled, that whatever resentment lingered had dulled with time. She had underestimated how sharp it still was. The middle sibling watched them both, her eyes moving back and forth, searching for something familiar in faces that no longer felt like family. She had always played this role: the bridge, the voice of reason, the one who tried to keep the peace while quietly carrying her own disappointments. She had expected conflict over the inheritance. She had not expected a secret powerful enough to stop it cold. The man at the end of the table closed his briefcase without taking his eyes off the room. He had done this for decades. Estates, trusts, final wishes. He had seen families fracture over far less than this. Still, something about the tension in this room unsettled him. The letter was not part of the original plan. It had been added late, very late. He remembered the night it was delivered to his office. No appointment, no warning, just an envelope, sealed by a man who knew he did not have much time left. The instructions had been clear. The words had not. Only open it if they fight. The eldest sibling finally spoke, his voice lower than before, measured, careful. "You said this explains the inheritance." "Yes," the man replied. "Then explain why it exists at all," he pressed. "If everything was so clear, why leave a letter that wasn't meant to be read?" The question landed hard. Because it was the right one. The youngest sibling shifted in her chair. "He always did things his own way," she said. "Maybe this is just another attempt to control us." The middle sibling shook her head slowly. "This doesn't feel like control," she said. "It feels like a warning." No one disagreed. The eldest sibling's gaze returned to the envelope. His fingers flexed against his forearm, betraying tension he refused to acknowledge. There was a time when letters like this had filled him with anticipation. Bonuses, promotions, expansion plans. Now, all he felt was unease. "You said it explains why things were divided the way they were," he said again. "Does it?" The man hesitated, just enough to be noticed. "It explains why your father believed this division was necessary," he said carefully. Necessary. The word echoed. The youngest sibling let out a short breath. "Then open it," she said. "If it justifies his decision, there's no reason to keep dragging this out." The middle sibling turned toward her. "Are you sure about that?" She didn't answer. Because for the first time since returning home, she wasn't sure of anything. The house felt different now. Familiar hallways suddenly seemed narrower. Childhood memories attached to the walls felt distant, like they belonged to another family entirely. This was supposed to be the end of mourning, the moment they closed a chapter and moved on. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something far worse. The eldest sibling stood and walked slowly toward the window. Outside, the estate stretched out in silence. Manicured lawns, tall gates, a legacy built piece by piece, decision by decision. He had protected all of it, defended it from outsiders, kept it alive when others doubted it could survive. And now, a single letter threatened to unravel everything. "What if this isn't about the inheritance at all?" the middle sibling asked quietly. They all turned to her. "What if it's about something else entirely?" she continued. "Something we were never told." The youngest sibling's jaw tightened. "Like what?" The middle sibling swallowed. "Like why things were the way they were growing up. Why certain decisions were made. Why some of us were pushed closer and others kept at a distance." The room grew heavier, because everyone at the table could think of moments that never quite made sense. Arguments that ended too abruptly. Favoritism that was never explained. Silences that stretched too long. The eldest sibling turned back from the window. "You're saying this letter rewrites our entire childhood." "I'm saying it might," she replied. The man at the end of the table finally reached for the envelope, sliding it just a few inches closer to himself. The movement alone sent a ripple through the room. "There is something else you should know," he said. "Your father instructed that this letter be read aloud only once." The youngest sibling frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, "that once it's read, there are no clarifications, no revisions, no second explanations." The eldest sibling laughed under his breath. "That sounds exactly like him." The man continued. "And he was very clear about one more thing." They waited. He believed at least one of you would try to stop this letter from being read. The youngest sibling stiffened. The middle sibling looked between them. The eldest sibling said nothing, but his expression hardened. The envelope sat between them, no longer just a document, but a line drawn through the center of the family. Whatever was inside, it was not just information. It was judgment. And for the first time since their father's death, each of them began to wonder the same thing. If this letter tells the truth, who does it destroy first? Thank you. I'm glad this is landing the way it should. The argument did not return all at once. It crept back in slowly, reshaped by suspicion instead of anger. The eldest sibling resumed his seat, but his posture had changed. He no longer leaned forward like someone ready to fight. He sat back, guarded eyes narrowed, as though measuring every word spoken around him. The youngest sibling noticed. She had always been quick to read shifts in power, in meetings, in negotiations, in family dynamics that were never as simple as they appeared. Whatever confidence she had carried into the room was now fractured, replaced by a quiet urgency she tried to disguise. This letter doesn't change the facts, she said. The will is legal. The assets are distributed. That's already settled. The middle sibling shook her head. Nothing about this feels settled. The man at the end of the table remained still, watching the exchange unfold. He had learned long ago that families revealed more in conflict than they ever did in calm. He did not interrupt. The eldest sibling let out a slow breath. "You're all missing a point," he said. "If this letter explains the inheritance, then it also explains why he thought we would fight." The youngest sibling turned toward him. "We didn't fight. You did." The accusation landed cleanly. He met her gaze. "Because someone benefited from that will," he said. "And it wasn't me." The middle sibling raised her hands slightly. "This isn't helping." "Neither is pretending this is normal," he replied. The tension sharpened. For years, they had avoided direct conversations like this. Disagreements were buried beneath politeness. Resentment was hidden behind obligation. Now, with nothing left to protect, the truth surfaced in fragments. "You left," the eldest sibling said suddenly, his voice lower. "You disappeared when things got hard, when he needed all of us." The youngest sibling's expression hardened. "I left because this house was suffocating. Because no matter what I did, it was never enough." "That's not true." "It is," she said. "And you know it." The middle sibling watched the exchange with growing dread. Each sentence peeled back memories she had tried to forget. Late nights, closed doors, conversations that stopped when she entered the room. The eldest sibling stood again, unable to sit still. "If this letter exists because he feared conflict, then it means he knew something we didn't." The man at the end of the table finally spoke. He believed silence had already done enough damage. "That stopped them. He told me," the man continued, "that this family survived because certain things were never said aloud. He also believed that silence was the reason it would eventually collapse." The youngest sibling swallowed. "So why not say it sooner?" "Because he wasn't ready to live with the consequences," the man replied. The eldest sibling's jaw tightened. "Convenient." "It's honest," the man said. The room fell quiet again. The envelope sat between them, now slightly closer to the center of the table, as if drawn there by the gravity of what it contained. No one touched it, but no one could stop looking at it either. The middle sibling spoke carefully. "If this letter tells the truth, then it explains more than the will." "Yes," the man said. "It explains the choices your father made for decades." The youngest sibling crossed her arms. "Then read it." The eldest sibling turned sharply toward her. "You're too eager." She met his stare. "And you're terrified." The accusation hung heavy. He laughed once, bitterly. "I'm cautious." "You're afraid," she said again. "Because whatever is in that letter threatens the story you've been telling yourself." The middle sibling stepped between them. "Enough." But the damage was already done. The eldest sibling looked at the envelope again, and something flickered across his face. Not anger, not fear. Recognition. "You said this letter was delivered late," he said to the man. "How late?" The man hesitated. "Very." "How close to the end?" The hesitation stretched longer this time. Close enough, the man replied. The eldest sibling nodded slowly. Then it wasn't written in peace. The youngest sibling frowned. What does that matter? It matters, he said, because people don't write calmly when they believe time is running out. The middle sibling felt a chill move through her. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting, he said, that this letter wasn't written to explain the inheritance. Silence followed. It was written to correct something. The youngest sibling's confidence faltered. Correct what? The eldest sibling didn't answer right away. He stared at the envelope as if willing it to stay closed. The past, he finally said. The man, at the end of the table, shifted in his chair. Your father used a similar word. The youngest sibling leaned forward. What word? Regret. The room felt smaller after that. The middle sibling pressed her hands flat against the table. If this letter is about regret, she said, then it's not about money. No, the man agreed. It's about responsibility. The eldest sibling turned away, pacing again. This is pointless. We're circling around something none of us wants to face. The youngest sibling stood as well. Then face it. He stopped in front of her. You think this ends well for you? Her voice dropped. I think it ends with the truth. That's not the same thing. The middle sibling's voice trembled. What if the truth ruins us? The man looked at her steadily. It already has. You're just catching up to it. The words cut deeper than anyone expected. The eldest sibling exhaled sharply. If this letter is read, there's no undoing it. The youngest sibling nodded. And if it isn't, we live the rest of our lives pretending. The middle sibling closed her eyes. She could see it clearly now. Two futures. Neither clean. Neither kind. One with silence and resentment. One with truth and fallout. The man reached for the envelope again, this time pulling it fully toward himself. Your father believed the damage of truth was temporary. And the damage of silence, the eldest sibling asked. Permanent, the man said. The youngest sibling looked away first. The middle sibling followed. Only the eldest sibling remained fixed on the envelope, his expression unreadable. If this letter is read, he said quietly, someone in this room loses everything. The man did not deny it. The eldest sibling nodded once. Then don't pretend this is about closure. He looked at each of them in turn. This is about exposure. The envelope rested between them, no longer just a warning, but a countdown. And with every second it remained unopened, the truth inside pressed harder against the fragile structure holding the family together. Because whatever their father had written was no longer waiting to be discovered. It was waiting to be survived. The envelope was opened. There was no ceremony to it, no dramatic gesture, just a quiet, irreversible sound of paper tearing, followed by the soft unfolding of a letter that had waited far too long to be read. The man scanned the first lines, his expression tightening almost immediately. The change did not go unnoticed. The youngest sibling leaned forward. Read it. He hesitated, then began. My children, the letter started. If you are hearing this, then I have failed in one final way. I failed to keep you from hurting each other. The words landed heavily. I want you to understand something before you judge what I have done. Everything I am about to say is the truth, whether you are ready for it or not. The eldest sibling folded his arms. Get to the point. The man continued. For years, I convinced myself that silence was protection, that withholding certain truths would spare you pain. I was wrong. The middle sibling felt her chest tighten. I did not divide the inheritance based on loyalty, effort, or love. I divided it based on guilt. The youngest sibling stiffened. The eldest sibling's jaw clenched. The man paused only long enough to steady his voice. There is a reason one of you was kept close. There is a reason one of you was pushed away. And there is a reason one of you was left in the middle, always trying to hold the rest together. The room felt unbalanced, as if the floor itself had shifted. The youngest sibling shook her head. This doesn't make sense. The man continued reading. Many years ago, I made a decision that changed the course of this family. A decision I spent the rest of my life trying to justify. The eldest sibling's breathing slowed. I allowed someone else to take the blame for something I caused. I let resentment grow where honesty should have lived. And I rewarded obedience instead of truth. The middle sibling whispered, "What did he do?" The man read on. "The child I trusted most was the one I wronged most deeply. And the child I gave everything to was the one I feared confronting." The youngest sibling's face drained of color. The eldest sibling took a step forward. "Read that again." The man didn't need to. The inheritance was not a gift, the letter continued. It was an attempt to correct a mistake I waited too long to face. The youngest sibling laughed once, hollow and sharp. "Correct what mistake?" The man's voice dropped slightly as he reached the next lines. "The company was never meant to belong to the person who holds it now." The eldest sibling froze. The middle sibling's hands trembled. The youngest sibling shook her head. "That's not possible." The man continued, each word tightening the air in the room. "I know what this revelation will cost you. I know it will expose things better left hidden. But I cannot leave this world without saying what should have been said decades ago." The eldest sibling spoke quietly. "Say it." The man swallowed. The inheritance was divided to force the truth into the open. The youngest sibling backed away from the table. "No, I am responsible," the letter read, "for turning you against each other. I am responsible for the distance you feel. And I am responsible for giving power to the wrong person." The eldest sibling's voice was steady now. "Who?" The man's eyes lifted from the page. "The one who was never supposed to carry it." The youngest sibling's confidence collapsed in an instant. "This is manipulation. He's rewriting history." The middle sibling shook her head slowly. "No, he's confessing." The man continued. "The child who was left out was not unworthy. The child who was rewarded was not innocent. And the child who tried to hold you together paid the price for both." The eldest sibling looked at the youngest. "What did you do?" She turned on him. "What did you do?" The man read the next lines, his voice steady despite the weight of the words. "I altered the truth years ago to protect the image of this family. In doing so, I destroyed the trust within it. The inheritance is not justice. It is leverage." The room felt unbearably small. The middle sibling pressed her hand to her mouth. "He used the will to force a reckoning." "Yes," the man said. "That is exactly what he did." The youngest sibling whispered, "This isn't fair." The eldest sibling's voice was cold. "Fair left this house a long time ago." The man read the final paragraph. "If this letter is read, then you are already standing in the consequences of my cowardice. I do not ask for forgiveness. I ask for honesty. And I ask that the person who truly deserves the legacy be given the chance I never allowed." The letter ended there. No apology. No comfort. Just exposure. The man folded the paper slowly. "That is everything." The youngest sibling sank into her chair, her victory evaporated, replaced by disbelief and fear. The middle sibling stared at the table, tears forming silently. The eldest sibling stood motionless. Everything they thought they knew had been rearranged. The inheritance was no longer a prize. It was an accusation, and the war they believed was over had only just revealed its true battlefield. No one spoke after the letter was folded away. The room that had once been filled with shouting now felt hollow, stripped of noise and certainty. The inheritance that had ignited the conflict sat unchanged on paper, but its meaning had shifted completely. The eldest sibling was the first to move. He walked back to the table slowly, no longer pacing, no longer posturing. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the anger that had fueled him earlier. "So this wasn't about punishment," he said. "It was about correction." The man nodded. "That was your father's intent." The youngest sibling shook her head, disbelief still clinging to her words. "You expect us to just accept this? After everything?" "No," the man replied. "He expected you to face it." The middle sibling finally lifted her gaze. Her eyes were red, but steady. "If the inheritance was meant as leverage," she said, "then what happens now?" The question lingered. The eldest sibling looked at the youngest. For the first time, there was no accusation in his eyes, Only understanding, hard-earned and painful. You didn't steal anything, he said. But you were given something that was never meant to protect you. She swallowed. And you think that makes this easier? No, he replied. I think it makes it honest. The middle sibling drew a quiet breath. He divided us because he knew silence would finish the damage he started. The man inclined his head. Yes. The youngest sibling stood. Her posture, once confident, now carried the weight of responsibility she had never asked for. If this legacy was never meant to be mine alone, she said, then I don't want it that way. The eldest sibling studied her carefully. You're willing to give it up? I'm willing to share the truth it came with, she said. And whatever comes after. The middle sibling stepped closer to them both. That was the part he trusted us with, she said. Not the money. The choice. The man closed his briefcase. Your father believed the three of you would find your way here eventually. The eldest sibling exhaled slowly. Years of resentment loosened their grip, replaced by something unfamiliar but necessary. We rebuild, he said. Not the company. Not the legacy. The family. The youngest sibling nodded. On different terms. The middle sibling allowed herself a small, tired smile. On honest ones. The house felt different as they moved through it together. Not lighter, but quieter. The portraits on the walls no longer watched in judgment. They simply observed. Outside, the estate remained unchanged, but inside, something fundamental had shifted. The inheritance would be restructured. The company reevaluated. Power redistributed with transparency instead of secrecy. It would take time. It would not be clean, but it would be real. As they prepared to leave the room, the man paused. There is one more thing your father asked me to say, he said. They turned back. He hoped that if you stayed long enough to hear the truth, you might stay long enough to heal. The eldest sibling nodded once. The youngest sibling wiped her face and squared her shoulders. The middle sibling reached for both of them, and this time neither pulled away. The war had ended not because someone won, but because the truth finally took its place. And in the quiet that followed, the family understood what their father had learned too late. An inheritance can divide wealth, but honesty decides what survives. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments, and consider subscribing for more stories where truth, consequence, and redemption collide.